Have you ever felt like you've been learning English for years, yet still can't speak naturally like a native? You listen, you read, you try so hard, but everything just slips through your ears, tangled in your mind. I was exactly like that, in a foreign country, lost among voices I couldn't understand. But from that frustration, I discovered a different way to learn. Slower, deeper, and more real. Today I'm going to tell you that story. Lost in translation. When I first arrived in Denmark, I thought my English was good enough to survive. I'd studied for years, passed exams, watched movies without subtitles. I was confident. But the first time a Danish barista asked, "Do you want it to go or stay?" my brain froze. I just smiled, nodded, and walked out without my coffee. That's when I realized my English didn't live in the real world, it lived in textbooks. The streets of Copenhagen felt like a test I hadn't studied for. People spoke too fast, words blended into each other, and their accents sounded like soft waves crashing over my head. I tried to listen, but everything came out as one blurry sound. And when I finally opened my mouth to reply, the words stuck in my throat like ice. That silence, that awkward, painful silence, became my shadow. I avoided conversations. I laughed when I didn't understand jokes. I nodded when people asked questions. Every day my confidence shrank a little more. I started to believe maybe I just wasn't the language type. But here's what I didn't know back then. When you move to a new country, it's not just your words that get lost. It's you. You start questioning your identity. You feel invisible. You stop talking not because you don't know what to say, but because you're afraid no one will understand. One night I sat alone in my tiny apartment, replaying the day in my head, all the moments I wanted to speak but didn't. And for the first time I asked myself, if I stop talking, how will anyone ever hear who I really am? That question hit me hard. It wasn't about English anymore. It was about finding my voice again, so I made a quiet promise. I would start small, one word, one sentence, one brave conversation at a time. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. That was the beginning, the moment I got lost in translation, only to realize I could find myself again through it. The silence after the storm. Silence used to feel like safety. After every awkward pause or failed conversation, I'd retreat into it, my invisible shelter. In Denmark, that silence grew louder than the city itself. The wind, the trams, even people laughing in cafes. Everything around me spoke a language I couldn't join. I thought silence would protect me. But really, it was slowly burying me alive. And those quiet days, I began noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The rhythm of speech, the rise and fall of tones, how Danes spoke English with a melody that felt like the sea, calm but deep. I realized I had been listening to words all my life, not sounds. That was the problem. I was hearing English like a student, not like a human. It's strange, isn't it? We spend years memorizing vocabulary, repeating phrases, chasing grammar. Yet we forget that language is music first. It has rhythm, pauses, and flow. Once you hear that rhythm, something clicks. You stop translating. You start feeling. So I began a small ritual. Every evening I'd sit by my window with tea, put on slow English podcasts, close my eyes and just listen. Not to understand, but to absorb. I'd imagine the sound waves brushing through my thoughts, tuning my ears like an instrument. First it felt useless. I didn't learn anything measurable. But inside something shifted. My ears were waking up. Scientists call this process neural adaptation. Your brain, when exposed to new sounds, starts building fresh connections, like roots spreading underground. It doesn't happen overnight, but one day those roots break through the surface. You begin to hear what you once couldn't. And that's what happened to me. I started catching tiny details, the way people linked words, how their intonation showed emotions, even when they used silence to mean something. I was still quiet, yes. But this time my silence wasn't empty. It was growing something, because sometimes, before you can speak again, you have to learn how to listen differently. Coffee, cold wind, and courage. It was one of those mornings when Denmark felt colder than usual, not just in weather but in spirit. The wind whipped across my face like tiny needles, and I could barely see through the fog. I was on my way to language class, clutching my phone like a lifeline, when I realized I was lost. Completely. The streets all looked the same, gray, quiet, and clean. My phone battery blinked 1%. Panic crept up my chest. My heart started racing, not because I was afraid of the cold, but because I knew what I had to do. Ask for directions in English. I hesitated. What if they didn't understand me? What if I froze mid-sentence again? My brain started listing every mistake I could make. But the wind didn't care. My fingers were numb, my nose red, and my pride, well, it was less important than getting warmed, so I walked into a small cafe, heart pounding, and said, "Excuse me, I think I'm lost." The barista smiled, a kind, real smile. "No problem," she said. "Where are you trying to go?" Her voice was warm, patient. She didn't rush. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was being tested. I wasn't in a classroom. I was just a human talking to another human. I stumbled through my words, mixed up tenses, used the wrong prepositions, but she waited. She even repeated things slowly for me. And suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. That tiny conversation about bus routes and wrong turns felt like climbing a mountain. When I stepped back outside, the cold air hit my face again, but it felt different this time. Fresher. Kinder. I realized something. Courage doesn't appear when you're ready. It appears when you're desperate enough to act anyway. That day, I didn't just find my way to class, I found a new kind of confidence. A quiet one. The kind that whispers, "You can do this." I didn't know it yet, but that one brave moment, that simple act of asking for help, would become the seed of everything I learned afterward about speaking English naturally. Because courage, like language, grows only when you use it. The secret of slow listening. Most people think the secret to learning English fast is, well, going fast. Listening to native speakers at full speed, binging podcasts, racing through lessons. I used to believe that too, until Denmark taught me the opposite. The day I started listening slowly, everything changed. It began one rainy afternoon. I was sitting in a library cafe, pretending to study but actually just watching people talk. Their conversations floated around me like a soft orchestra, full of rhythm, pauses, and laughter. I couldn't understand every word, but I could feel the flow. And then it hit me, language isn't built from words. It's built from music. When you slow down, you start to notice the tiny details that fast learners miss. The way want to becomes wanna. How did you melts into didja. Those little sounds are what make you understand like a native. It's not magic. It's rhythmed, so I changed my practice completely. Instead of racing through videos, I listened to one short clip over and over. I closed my eyes, traced every rise and fall of the speaker's voice, mouthed the words like a song. Sometimes I even hummed the intonation before speaking. It felt silly, but it worked. My Danish friend Anna once told me, "You listen like you're tuning a violin." I laughed, but she was right. Every sound, every breath, every pause mattered. And the more I listened slowly, the more I understood naturally. It wasn't about effort anymore. It was about attention. There's real science behind this too. Studies show that our brains absorb language patterns better when we process them slowly. It builds what linguists call auditory memory. It's like training your ears to dance before your tongue joins in. And one day while buying groceries, I realized I didn't have to translate what the cashier said. I just knew it. My brain didn't run around searching for meaning. It simply flowed. That's when I finally understood. Mastering English isn't about listening faster. It's about listening deeper. Because when you slow down, you stop chasing words and start feeling the language itself. Mimic the music, not the words. Have you ever noticed how babies learn to speak? They don't memorize vocabulary lists or grammar rules. They mimic. The sounds, the tone, the rhythm, even the facial expressions. They don't care what each word means. They just copy the melody until one day, it all makes sense. That's how I started retraining my English, not by studying it, but by mimicking its music. It began as a game. I'd pick short English clips, movie dialogues, TED Talks, even random YouTube shorts, and shadow every word. But instead of worrying about meaning, I focused on how it sounded. The emotion, the breath, the timing. I exaggerated the tone, raised my eyebrows, even acted a little dramatic. I looked ridiculous, but it worked. There's a magic that happens when you copy the music of English. Suddenly the accent starts to click. Your mouth muscles, yes, the physical ones, begin to remember how to move. Linguists call this muscle memory of pronunciation. It's like playing guitar. At first, your fingers hurt. But soon, they just know where to go. I remember one day my Danish coworker said, "You sound different. Like more alive when you speak English." That line stayed with me. I realized I wasn't just learning a language, I was learning a rhythm of connection. When I mimicked, I wasn't repeating mindlessly. I was feeling what native speakers felt when they spoke. Their stress, their joy, their sarcasm. And that's what made my words sound natural. Not perfect, but human. So here's the secret I wish I knew earlier. Stop chasing perfect pronunciation. Stop whispering vocabulary to yourself like a robot. Instead, find a voice you love. Maybe your favorite actor, podcaster, or even a friend, and copy their music. Whisper it. Sing it. Laugh with it. Do it until your tongue dances without asking your brain for permission. Because English isn't a list of words, it's a song. And once you learn to sing it, speaking becomes effortless. Talking to the mirror. If there's one thing more terrifying than speaking English to strangers, it's speaking English to yourself. Especially in front of a mirror. The first time I tried, I couldn't look myself in the eye. It felt strange, almost embarrassing, like talking to a version of me I didn't fully believe in. But that's exactly why it worked. I started small. Every morning after brushing my teeth, I'd stand in front of the mirror and describe my day out loud. What I planned to do, what I felt. Even silly things like, "Wow, my hair looks wild today." At first my voice trembled. I stumbled. I laughed awkwardly. But little by little, that reflection started talking back, not literally but emotionally. I began to sound more confident, more expressive, more alive. It turns out, speaking to yourself is one of the most powerful tools in language learning. Psychologists call it self-rehearsal. When you talk to the mirror, your brain doesn't just hear the words. It sees your emotions, your gestures, your expressions. You start connecting words to feelings, not just to meanings. That's how real communication happens. Some days I'd even act out imaginary conversations, ordering coffee, interviewing for a job, comforting a friend. Sometimes I'd mess up and start over. Sometimes I'd just talk nonsense. But slowly, the fear of speaking began to melt away. My voice didn't sound foreign anymore, it sounded like me. And the funny part? I started to enjoy it. It became a daily ritual. My mirror wasn't a piece of glass anymore. It was a stage, a safe place to fail loudly. Because when you're not afraid to sound silly alone, you stop being afraid to sound human in front of others. One morning, I caught myself smiling while talking. It wasn't because my English was perfect, it wasn't, but because it finally felt natural. I had built a tiny bridge between my thoughts and my voice, so if you ever feel stuck, find a mirror. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect words. Just start talking to the person who needs to hear you most, yourself. When words started to bloom. One crisp spring morning, I was sitting by the lakes in Copenhagen, watching sunlight dance on the water, when I realized something quietly amazing. I had just spent an entire hour chatting in English without thinking. No translating. No panic. No searching for words. They simply came. Like blossoms opening after a long silent winter. It didn't happen overnight. It happened because of all those tiny moments that once felt useless. The awkward coffee talks, the slow listening, the mirror conversations, the mimic sessions that made me laugh. Each of them planted a seed. I just hadn't noticed they were growing. You see, language doesn't reward you immediately. It hides your progress in the roots. For weeks, even months, you might feel nothing changing, and then suddenly it blooms all at once. Scientists call this the incubation effect. Your brain silently organizing what it learned until one day, everything clicks. I remember the moment clearly. I was talking with a Danish colleague about weekend plans. Halfway through the conversation, I realized I wasn't translating anymore. I was just being myself in another language. And that feeling, that freedom, was better than any grammar certificate I'd ever earned. When you stop focusing on being perfect, your words start breathing. They become lighter, warmer, and real. And when people understand you, not because your grammar is flawless, but because your feelings are clear, that's when English stops being a subject and becomes a part of your soul. That day by the lake, I felt proud. Not because I'd mastered English, but because I'd survived every moment I wanted to give up, and kept going. My words, once shy and heavy, had finally learned to bloom. So if your English feels stuck right now, don't panic. Keep watering it with patience, mistakes, laughter, and courage. Because language grows quietly, and one morning, you'll wake up realizing you're already fluent in your own resilience. From pain to bloom. When I first came to Denmark, I thought learning English fluently would make me enough. Smarter, more confident, more worthy. But the truth is, English didn't just teach me a language. It taught me how to grow through discomfort. It taught me patience, humility, and connection. It taught me that pain, the kind that makes you want to quit, is often the soil where your strength begins to bloom. There were days I wanted to give up. Days when every word felt wrong, every accent felt fake, every sentence took forever. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, exhausted and angry at myself for not being better. But now I see that frustration was part of the process. Growth doesn't feel like growing. Feels like failing until suddenly it doesn't. And here's the most beautiful part, the goal was never perfection. It was connection. The first time I had a deep conversation in English, really connecting with someone, heart to heart, I realized that understanding another language isn't about grammar. It's about empathy. It's about daring to be seen and to see others beyond the limits of words. Every mistake I made, every pause, every and sorry, can you repeat that? They weren't signs of weakness. They were proof that I was trying. They were proof that I was alive, learning, reaching beyond comfort. Now when I hear my old recordings, my nervous voice, my broken sentences, I don't cringe anymore. I smile. Because that was me planting hope in the dark. And without those moments, I would never have learned how to bloom in the light. So if you're somewhere in your journey, feeling lost, remember this: language isn't about sounding perfect. It's about being brave enough to speak anyway. Because from pain grows understanding, from mistakes grows courage, and from silence blooms your voice. That's how I found mine.